Good evening, everyone. Welcome to our webinar on greener homes, how you can make your home future fit. And thank you all for joining us on this Wednesday evening. If I could just ask you to mute your microphone. And there are quite a lot of people on this webinar, so if you wouldn't mind switching off your video while you're not talking, that will probably help us a little bit with the bandwidth as well. So we'll just wait for a few late joiners. I can see quite a few more people jumping into the waiting room now, and then we will go ahead and get started. There we go. Okay. So I think we will get started now. Thank you all for joining us once again. I hope that you can all see my screen, and if you can't, please drop a message in the chat. We will be recording this session and it will be shared with participants afterwards. So if you do have to drop off, please go ahead. Thanks, Deborah, for the message. So without further ado, let's get started on how to green your home, a 4-week short course where we'll learn about experts from energy efficiency and home retrofits to find solutions for your own home, personalized to you, where you can lower your carbon emissions and your energy bills at the same time. There's a little bit of housekeeping. As I mentioned earlier, the webinar is being recorded. And if I could ask you to please switch off your microphones and your videos. And if you do not want to be seen on the video, you can edit your name and change it to a sort of anonymous name. The recordings will be available on the CELSI website afterwards, and we'll send round a link to those of you that signed up through Eventbrite. Thank you all for joining us, and thanks to so many of you that donated towards this course. All of your donations are going to go towards furthering CELSI's carbon saving and poverty work, so that helps us a huge amount. And a big thanks to the Big Lottery, who've actually funded the course and funded our guest speakers to join us for this topic. So a little bit about me. I'm Nadia Smith. Some of you will have met me before, some of you are completely new faces. I'm a project manager and a volunteer director at South East London Community Energy. I work kind of across the clean energy space, and my background is mainly in solar. I used to work at the REA, and I wrote a briefing on homes fit for the future, which went to government talking about how they can implement higher standards to build homes that are more energy efficient and really future ready. I have managed to pick up a few awards along the way, which has been great fun. Community Energy Young Champion and the Power Players Award winner last year as well. And if you'd like to get in touch, I'm sort of the first port of call for anything to do with Futurefit homes or any outreach that you have for CELSI. So my contact details are down there on the right. It's just nadia@celsi.org.uk. So a little bit about the course before we get into it. If you've signed up on Eventbrite to one of the events, it is the same link that you'll be using for all the events. So don't worry too much about signing up to the rest of the dates. But we're starting off today with fabric efficiency and building fabric presentation, which basically looks at the basics of what you need to know when you think about energy efficiency, and when you think about how you can actually start to tackle the huge project that is making your home more energy efficient. And we'll also go through the Greener Homes grant and what that offers. Next Wednesday, we've got another webinar which delves more deeply into sustainable building and into different types of insulation. And that is Wednesday, the 21st of October. And there we'll look at how you can actually go through the application process for the Greener Homes grant, what you need to get prepared for that, etc., etc. And then we will have a short break for the October half term. And we'll be coming back on Wednesday, the 4th of November, to have a talk from someone who's gone through the experience of doing a full home retrofit. We'll find out how that process went for him, what he had to consider, what he had to deal with when he got into the bit working with contractors, what went well and what didn't go so well. And then the last session is on Wednesday the 11th, and we'll be looking at renewable energy and what technologies are fit for your home to employ, what are the key technologies and how can they all work together to create the smart homes of the future, and to not only green our own energy consumption, our own carbon emissions, but also work for the wider energy system in the UK. In the last session, we'll also be doing a bit of a course roundup and talking about the next steps for if you do want to go ahead and look at completely retrofitting your home to become energy efficient. And we'll look at the Futurefit Homes programme and what, how that can support you to go through that process. So just for today's agenda, and bear with me while I let a few more people in who are in the waiting room. And there we go. So today's agenda, we'll be looking at what Futurefit Homes is, and this is a new project that CELSI are launching, and who exactly CELSI are. Quite a few of you have been engaged with us before, but I'm sure many of you have never heard of us and don't know what on earth we do. And then the Greener Homes grant will really be looking at what technologies are included, who can qualify for this grant and what it covers. And I've got a few quick tips of what you can do right now after you finish this webinar to reduce your home's carbon emissions. And then we'll go into a very quick question and answer session. And then after that, we have our expert guest speaker, James Traynor, who will be giving us the basics of energy efficiency and what to look out for. And then also going into a few models of extreme or high energy efficiency that they use in designing buildings. And then we'll have another question and answer where you can ask James all of your questions yourselves. So a little bit about Futurefit Homes. This project has been set up by CELSI and it's currently in the pilot phase, but we will be launching very soon. And what we're looking to offer is a full package of how we can help you go from having perhaps an older building that is a little bit leaky, a little bit cold, maybe you've got damp in some places as well, and go through the whole process of working out what matters to you. Is it living in a warmer home? Is it reducing your carbon emissions? Is it reducing your bills, or is it a mix of all of those? And really creating a program that will help you go from start to finish. We will offer a home energy audit where we can go into your home, give you a full report of all the advice of different technologies that we think could support you in reducing your emissions. And sorry, some more people in the waiting room, lots of people joining late. And we can give you a thermal imaging report where we'll go through your home with a thermal imaging camera, point out every little place that you are losing heat from your home. And it's amazing to see when you've got it in front of you, because you don't realize quite how much heat is lost just through your home, just through drafts in your home. We also offer retrofit coordination, and what that means is working with contractors that are vetted and approved and the CELSI team actually helping you manage who will be coming in, when they'll be coming in, dealing with those people one-to-one, and then making sure that it is a smooth and simple journey relatively for you guys. We also have a few DIY workshops. These are sort of sessions like this, which are webinars where you can just take those skills. If you're not necessarily looking to do this right now, it's just a knowledge source for you. We'll have bits like how to insulate your home yourself, how to sort of build your own solar panel, and things like that. And telephone consultations. Our advisors are available to talk to you one-to-one and give you advice personally. So really the aim of the Futurefit Homes programme is to create a greener and cleaner London. As I mentioned, all our staff are very well trained in energy efficiency, and we're also members of Retrofit Works, which is a cooperative of contractors based across London who are all sort of working together to manage a smooth transition through that journey of retrofitting your home. All of the surpluses that we do generate from this project will go back into our fuel poverty alleviation and carbon emissions reduction work, which I'll touch on a little bit later. But essentially what we look at when we're looking at how you can decarbonize your home is 4 key things. The first of those is how you can use less fuel in general. The second is keeping the heat in. The third is upgrading your heating systems, making them more energy efficient. And the fourth is your transition to renewable energy, taking you away from those gas boilers and, you know, heavily polluting sources of energy. Some people who live more rurally will be using solid fuels and sort of log burners and bits like that to heat their homes. So looking at renewable energy is a great last option. So a little bit about CELSI. CELSI was formed years ago, and our aim is to create a low carbon future where everyone has access to affordable energy to meet their needs and has a voice in how it's produced. So we developed ourselves as a community benefit society, and we've got a cooperative structure. So everyone that is a member of CELSI has a say in how it's run. And we've had some wonderful volunteers come on board and support us in this journey, which has created over 10,000 volunteering hours that have gone into CELSI's work. And I'm sure a lot of you that are on this call have been part of those 10,000 hours. And it's actually even more because we've stopped counting how many hours people have volunteered for us now. So a little bit about CELSI. We have installed solar on approximately 14 sites across Lewisham and Greenwich. Those include schools, they include leisure centres that are running programmes for health for different individuals within the community, and community hubs. And then we're also supporting organisations decarbonise by switching to LED lighting, and we actually fund these measures, and then the sites pay us back over time. And it's worth mentioning that the measures funded, like the solar and the LED lighting, are through community investment. So it is people like you that are investing in us and getting a return on that investment over time. One of the other key factors of CELSI is its fuel poverty alleviation work. And I'm really glad to say that last winter we have managed to grow and do really, really well in terms of actually managing to support 554 energy cafe clients in just one winter. Now, our energy cafes are something that is developed around destigmatizing being fuel poor, and really helping people be comfortable and be open to talking about whether they have energy debt, what problems they're having within their home, and really opening up to our advisors and letting them in and letting them support them. We also held over 239 home visits where we went and talked to people one-to-one and identified what savings they could find and how they could reduce their carbon emissions within their homes. We identified over £385,000 of savings, which is, as you can imagine, a huge amount. It results in kind of thousands for some people and hundreds for other people. And this year we've actually extended our program, which usually only runs in the winter, to the whole year because of coronavirus, now that we've seen the impact on people and how many people have access to food banks, but they don't have access to gas and electricity because they haven't put enough money on their prepayment meter, and they can't cook their food that they've gone and got from their food banks. So it's been a very, very busy year. So moving on quickly to the Greener Homes grant. If you just bear with me for 1 minute, I will let a few more people into the webinar. I'll just pause that. There we go. So welcome to the new people that are just joining. Thank you for joining us. We are just starting on the Greener Homes grant, so you've got to the good bit if you've just joined now. So a lot of you will be aware that the Greener Homes grant is something that the government recently launched, and it is a relatively good amount of money that supports homeowners and residential landlords to green their homes, reduce their carbon emissions, and invest in their homes through a voucher, which will be paid to the installer or the contractor is installing the measures for the homeowner or residential landlord. So who does it cater to? Well, this is open to anyone who owns their own home or is a residential landlord under certain circumstances. So it's also open to long leaseholders and people that live in shared ownership homes. It's open to private or social rented sector landlords, including local authorities and housing associations as well. But all landlords must provide evidence that their building does meet the minimum energy efficiency standards. Those standards currently stand at a rating of EPC level E or above. And if your home doesn't meet those standards, you must provide proof that you have exemption. And this is pretty standard because all landlords have to meet those standards if they're renting their property out anyway. So what does it cover? Well, the Greener Homes grant covers up to 2/3 of the cost of measures to green your home, and the amount is up to £5,000. So it's a decent amount of money, and that would be worth applying for. For those on low income, they could apply for a larger amount, which could be up to 100% of the cost of the measures, and that's up to £10,000, although landlords aren't able to apply for the low income support. And it's also only available for older homes. It's not available for anything that is newly built, which have never previously been occupied. So there are a few other bits of energy efficiency funding which certain people may be aware of. You cannot use it linked with or paired with eco-funding. Eco-funding is something called Energy Companies Obligation Funding, and that is available for certain energy efficiency measures for people on low income. You can use a Greener Homes grant voucher for other measures as long as they are not funded by the eco-funding, but there's no issue with the same household applying for both. You can also use the Greener Homes grant for renewable heat technologies, but it will be deducted from any subsidies that you get off of those heat technologies. So say, for example, if you got a heat pump installed and you were then getting renewable heat incentive payments on that heat pump, the cost of the Greener Homes Grant would come out of the payments over time. And you must apply for the Greener Homes Grant first, and then you would notify Ofgem after you've installed your technology when you apply for the renewable heat incentive that you did use the GHG. And you cannot use it in conjunction with a local authority delivery scheme grant. I will thank you for the questions in the chat. We will get to the questions just after the end of the presentation. So there are two sets of measures that the Greener Homes Grant covers. One they call primary measures, the other they call secondary measures. Within the primary measures, and that is what the grant is kind of mainly focused on, you have to use it for at least one of these. So you couldn't use it for only secondary measures. And the primary measures include insulation of many, many kinds. So you're looking at solid wall insulation, cavity wall, underfloor, loft insulation, in-roof insulation, and insulating a park home. And then you can also apply for any low carbon heat technologies such as air source heat pumps, ground source heat pumps, solar thermal, biomass boilers, and hybrid heat pumps. You cannot apply for solar PV within the Greener Homes Grant. So the secondary measures you can apply for as long as you've had one of the primary measures using the Greener Homes Grant. The cost of these measures can't exceed the amount of one of the primary measures, so the focus is definitely on the primary measures. Cost of these anyway is probably lower than the primary measures in general. And you can only redeem the vouchers for the secondary measures after you've installed the primary measures and redeem the voucher for the primary measures. So the secondary measures include things around windows and doors like draft proofing, double or triple glazing, but only where you're replacing single glazed windows. Secondary glazing and energy efficient replacement doors. So this is for doors that were installed before kind of 2002. And the heating controls that are included and the insulation, which are part of the secondary measures, are a hot water tank thermostat, hot water tank insulation, and other heating controls like appliance thermostats, zone controls, TRVs, thermostatic radiator valves, and bits like that. So all of the work that you have done through the Greener Homes Grant must be completed by contractors that are registered with Trustmark, and your installer will have to meet PAS and MCS standards when they're installing your measures. The MCS standard are pretty standard when it comes to renewable energy installers. PAS is also pretty standard when it comes to energy efficiency installers, although there are quite a few organizations currently applying for these certifications. So I know that if you are looking at contacting contractors right now, quite a lot of them are incredibly busy with applications through the Greener Homes Grant, and there is a little bit of a backlog when it comes to applying for this scheme probably. So that brings me to the end of the Greener Homes Grant. Next week we'll look at how exactly you can apply for it, what the process looks like, and we'll look at it in more detail. But what can you do right now today before you leave this webinar? Well, the first thing I would suggest and recommend is switching your energy supplier. If you're with one of the big six and you're on a tariff that is consuming kind of natural gas and electricity from power stations that might be powered by coal, please look at something else. You can switch your energy supplier by going onto a switching site and comparing different deals. You'll quite often get a cheaper deal if you are switching from one of the big six, and it is relatively easy to do. South East London Community Energy is actually partnered with an organisation called Co-op Community Energy, and they are part of sort of the bigger mid-counties co-op. They've launched a tariff which is completely supplied by organisations like ours. So they're buying electricity from community groups across the UK, and you can power your homes with that. If you do choose to switch to them through Celsey will also get a bit of a finder's fee, which will go back into our fuel poverty work as well. And you can find the details of that on our website. I will drop the link a little bit later in this webinar. Second thing you could do, which you're probably already doing if you're on the webinar, is considering a deep retrofit for your home. And you'll find out the details of how you can start thinking about that through James's talk, which is coming up a bit later. So if you're interested in joining the Futurefit Homes programme and you live in South East London, do contact us. You can get in touch with me directly. My email is nadia@celsey.org.uk, or you can email futurefithomes@celsey.org.uk. I will drop both of those contact details in the chat section a little bit later as well. But if you're not joining us from South East London, if you're elsewhere in London or you're outside London, then I would definitely recommend visiting the Community Energy England website, where you can check out who your local community energy group is and find out a little bit more about what they do, see if they offer any support with community energy work on energy efficiency and greening your home, because a lot of groups are getting involved with this. So if you have any questions, please go ahead and let's drop them in the chat rather than the Q&A section now. And I will just have a look at the questions that have come up. Thank you, everyone. So copies of the slides. We will have the webinars recorded and put on our website, so you can access them there. We can also upload copies of the slides on the website as well, yes. The landlord has to meet EPC-E or above. That does not apply to homeowners currently, it just applies to landlords. From Mark has sent a message in asking if the GHG, the Greener Homes Grant or the Eco Funding pay to remove the old cavity wall insulation and replace it with newer insulation. My understanding is yes, it will include taking out the old insulation, because once you get your quote from your contractor, it will include sort of anything to do with materials, labour and VAT that is involved within that quote, as long as it's to do with a technology that's included in their list. Mark is asking for recommendations of contractors who are Trustmark or MTS registered in South East London. Mark, if you're interested, get in touch with us or check out Retrofit Works. We work with, so as I mentioned, Retrofit Works is a group of local contractors who are all part of this cooperative and have been vetted and are a very, very good standard. And we can link you to them and put you in touch and get quotes from different contractors and compare them for you. Peter's asking if there is a glossary at the end. I'm afraid there's not a glossary. PAS and CEE. So PAS, I'm not sure what PAS stands for, but it's a certification system that is used for energy efficiency installers. CEE is Community Energy England or Community Energy Enterprises. But I can add the glossary into the end of the slides once I upload them on the website. So Kurazan is asking, do primary and secondary measures mean that you can benefit from the scheme twice, i.e. have 2 vouchers? My understanding is that you will initially have to apply for the first voucher, and that might not be the full £5,000 for the primary measure, and then once you have that, you will have to apply for the second voucher. So in essence, yeah, it will be 2 vouchers, but the second one is linked to the first one, if that makes sense.
Hi Nadia, it's Alex. Can I just chip in with something?
Go for it, Alex.
People only get one bite of the cherry. So for example, if you've got 2 homes, you can only apply for it for the one that is your main residence. Or if you have a house that you rent out and your tenants might make that home accessible for the £10,000, you'd have to make a choice if you wanted to do your own residence or the other house. It's not per property, it's per individual, just to clarify.
Lovely. Thank you very much, Alex. That's super helpful. Alex is also one of our directors at Chelsea, and she's been very on it with the Greener Homes grant, been very involved in the Futurefit Homes programme as well. So do get in touch with her through the chat if you have very detailed questions. She is an expert on this. Okay. So Giovanna's also highlighted that we're able to offer support and advice through our whole house plan, where we'll support you to diagnose what measures are needed and then refer you through our network of vetted contractors and project manage all of that work. So essentially that does mean supporting you through the whole process. It means going through an initial telephone conversation to find out what type of home you have, what type of energy you use and how you use it, and then going in possibly to your home and meeting you one-to-one, or doing it through a different method, through a telephone call, and doing a full report of what we think the best solutions would be for your home, and providing you with different quotes of contractors, and then supporting you through managing the contractors as well. So it is very much a full program, as Giovanna mentioned. Thank you for that, G. Ian Morris is asking about if we're not eligible for the Futurefit program, is there a cheap way that we can use a thermal imaging camera to determine where we're losing heat? So Ian, I would say it is best to have it done by an expert, just because you'll be able to understand the amount of heat that you're losing in different places, and you don't have to be eligible for our program through Futurefit Homes, but you might be able to apply for the grant and you might be eligible for that. The cost through Chelsea is relatively inexpensive because we have been supported by another community group to get the thermal imaging equipment, which is generally the expensive bit, but that's the perks of working with community energy groups. And we also have our own in-house team that go and do the thermal imaging. So it's not done through a company with big overheads. So you might find it a little bit cheaper to do it through ourselves, Ian. But I understand that you can download thermal imaging software on certain devices, but I'm not sure how kind of accurate it would be. Question from GJ is asking, can housing co-ops apply for the Greener Homes grant, and would you be treated as a landlord or as an individual owner? I can look into that question, GJ. From my understanding, housing co-ops can apply for it. I'm not sure whether they'd be treated as a landlord or as an individual owner, but I assume it would be treated as kind of shared ownership. So I guess you would be treated as an individual owner. But I can find out more details for you on that. But Alex, if you have any advice, please pitch in now. Pete, you live in Ilford, East London. I'm afraid we can't cover you in the Celsius schemes, but I believe there is a community energy group that covers East London, and I think it is Bromley by Bow. So you might be able to Google them and check them out. Amjud Hussain is asking, if you're a landlord with more than one property, can you apply on all of your properties? Amjud, from my understanding, no, you can only apply for the scheme once, so for one property. Ellie, yes, the scheme also applies for flats. And okay, I think that is it from the questions. So thank you everyone for joining us for the chat. Again, if you have any more questions, or if you want to get involved with the Futurefit Homes program and you want to find out how we can help you go through that process, drop me an email. My email is on screen, nadia@celsi.org.uk. But for now, I think I will go ahead and introduce our guest speaker for the session. So a very, very warm welcome to James Traynor, who is a manager at ECD Architects. He's also author of an amazing book called EnerPhit, which is a step-by-step guide to low energy retrofit. It retails for about £45 on Amazon, plug in case anyone's interested in that. But James is also a passive house designer, and he has 15 years of experience in low energy design. He also studied at the Centre for Alternative Technology in Wales, which many of you will be quite familiar with, and he's an architecture graduate from Liverpool University. In his spare time, he's also a chair at his local tenant management organisation in South London. So James, I will pass on to you, and we'll be taking questions from the audience after James's presentation.
Okay, thank you, Nadia. I'll just try and share my screen now. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah, that's wonderful.
Okay. Okay. Thank you for inviting me along today. I'm just going to really begin, obviously, with a little introduction about myself and ECD, who I work for, but quickly move on to talk about domestic retrofit. And this is the structure of what I was going to be talking about today. Just an introduction, as I say, and then context, set the scene context of why we're looking at domestic retrofit. Then the fundamentals really of energy use and benefits of retrofit, what the standards are, what you might consider as options for retrofit, how you evaluate those, then some of the practicalities, which I think probably will be touched on in more detail over future weeks, where the implementation stages, then an alternative approach, and then why is it all worth it in the end anyway. So without further ado, I'll skip on past that without a plug for the book, which you've already had. ECD have been around 40 years. This is our anniversary this year. So we've been involved in lots of energy conscious design, which is what it stands for, over that time. And we tend to work with a lot of local authorities and housing associations, but we don't tend to work with individual homeowners. There are a few exceptions to that, but this being one of them on the right hand side, which was a scheme that we led for 6 London boroughs a few years ago, led by Haringey, for about 1,200 private sector homeowners, where we were working for the local authority, and probably a bit like Celsius, really in South London, as energy advisors. We were Smart Homes Advisors, I think it was called at the time, and our job was to advise homeowners on the relevant measures and then monitor post-completion. But most of our work tends to be bigger projects, and the project on the left-hand side is more typical, and that was a project we completed a few years ago, which was designed to the EnerPhit standard, which I'll be talking about later today. That was a 1960s block on the south coast. We also do lots of other things as well, which I'll just skip past, but it's mostly housing and schools and the like. But more importantly, I suppose our ethos is really in refurbishment and in new build is to try to keep things simple. And this little cartoon really explains what I mean by that, really, that and it could also be described in some ways as a history of the house typology from the 19th century through to modern times. And I think in the 20th century, we tended to fill our houses with lots of kit, whether it was central heating systems, and sometimes very necessary. But actually nowadays we have the knowledge and experience and detailed understanding of the building physics that we actually don't need to fill our houses with all that kit. We can make them work much harder and much more simply by insulating them properly. So we take what's called a fabric first approach, which I'll be talking about shortly. So context, again, I'll skip past this because I think the audience really tonight, I get the sense that you know all that about the background to this, but obviously we're looking to massively reduce our carbon emissions as a country, and domestic retrofit will support that, but it also offers many other things as well, which again I'll be talking about shortly. What do we mean by net zero? Well, it means that obviously the energy consumption can't be greater than the renewable energy production. So the image on the left-hand side is you can build as many wind turbines and solar panels as you like, but you're not going to match the energy demand. If we don't reduce the current demand, we're not going to be able to achieve that net zero balance, which we obviously need to do. So we need targets, and that's what this is all about. And we can't just rely on improving standards for new buildings. 95% of the homes that are currently here will still be here in 2050. Yes, there will be new homes, and yes, they need to be zero carbon, but we do need to tackle our existing buildings for lots of reasons. Just to say where is the biggest source of CO2? This is an average semi-detached property with a little bit of insulation in the loft, but not a great deal else. Double glazed windows, but not particularly good ones. Uninsulated walls and floors. And you can see the majority of the CO2 is coming from the heating. And a lot of that is caused by the heat loss through the walls, but also air changes. You can see there on the right-hand side, there's a significant proportion of the heat loss. So that's where the heat is going and the CO2 for a typical house. Perhaps an interwar house or a pre-war house. What is the average heating demand of an average house, and how do we measure it anyway? So the pounds and pence, if you like, of what we're talking about is the kilowatt hours per square metre per year. And what is the UK average, and what could we get to? And bad practice, or what is a solid, let's say, detached 1900s property will be losing significantly more heat than a flatted property built to modern standards. But even there, you can see that the bars on the left-hand side show what is possible by insulating our buildings properly. We can massively reduce our energy consumption, even above and beyond current building regulation standards. So there is a potential to achieve that. But why would you bother? Somebody might say, isn't there a widget to sort this out somewhere? Yes, green electricity is making a big impact, but unfortunately we can't just build more wind turbines. So the graph on the left-hand side there is just showing the carbon intensity of the grid, and it is dropping significantly over the next 15 years. And it has already dropped significantly over the last 15 or 20 years. But in of itself, that's not enough, as I'll explain shortly. Some people are talking about hydrogen as a potential replacement for gas. Can that simply switch out the gas, switch on the hydrogen? And what about heat pumps, air source heat pumps, ground source heat pumps? Are they the solution? Do we need to bother with retrofit? I'm afraid the answer is yes, we do. Obviously, it tackles carbon emissions, but it also deals with other things as well in terms of thermal comfort, which I'll come on to shortly. But the huge increase anticipated in the demand for electricity from the electrification of the transport system and the phasing out of fossil fuels means that we simply cannot switch out and rely on even a significant increase in the provision of renewables to match the current demand of heating. Hydrogen, yes, trials are ongoing, but that's inconclusive because there's issues around how intensive it is, carbon intensive it is to produce the hydrogen in the first place. Then the heat pumps, well, they will be a key part of the equation, but only if retrofit is undertaken first. They're not designed to heat inefficient homes, and they also will be very expensive, particularly in relation to gas, if you simply switch out a gas boiler for a heat pump in a inefficient, leaky home. So thermal comfort is incredibly important. 12% of Londoners are suffering from fuel poverty, and it's great to hear the work that Celsius are doing there. But many others are unable to heat their homes adequately as well. And overheating in the summer is actually an increasing problem with climate change. And actually, building retrofit isn't just about the winter months, it also can deal with some of the summer issues as well, whether that be shading or the type of glazing used in the windows. There's things that can be done there to tackle that increasing problem. And the drafts and temperature swings in one of these leaky homes leads to poor heat distribution, and sometimes you might have cold ankles but hot heads. I'm sure some of you will be familiar with that. So the building is a system. Every building is a system, and it's really important to understand the basic building physics of that, and how insulation and the amount of insulation relates directly to the amount of heating that is required, and the amount of ventilation that's required is also relevant. And in understanding that, then you can avoid the risks, and the risks are moisture. You can see an image on the right hand side, which you can imagine in a bathroom. Perhaps it's an uninsulated loft space above there. That can then cause condensation, which can cause mold. That then obviously affects the air quality, and then perhaps there's insufficient heat or excessive heat in some cases. So it's really important to understand the balance that is in every building. And quality is really, really important. Some of you who have been watching this space really for the last 5 or 10 years, you'll have think, well, surely we've been here before. What about Green Deal? And that was launched about 6 years ago or so. And what went wrong last time, and why will it be different this time? Lots of lessons were learned there, and the government was given advice by some of those of us in the know at the time about some of the things they should have done, and well, it's fair to say that now those measures have been incorporated, and some really good work has been done on the back of this report, which came out a couple of years ago, Each Home Counts. And that then has led to the PAS 2035, publicly available specification 2035, and the role of the retrofit coordinator. And that's what I'm going to come on to next. It's great, and it's great to hear that Celsius are offering that service. So PAS 2035, this is sort of the principles that are enshrined into that: professional accountability, whole house retrofit, bespoke projects, basically that every house is unique and it requires a bespoke solution for that. Build tight, ventilate right. So again, going back to what I was saying, everything is linked. So you need to ensure that when you insulate a property, you're not sealing it up and preventing ventilation. Quality is absolutely essential, and it has to be built into the process. And then fabric first, which, if you don't remember anything from what I'm going to say tonight, fabric first is the most important thing, really, that we shouldn't be throwing lots of kit or services at our buildings without tackling our existing building fabric and reducing the energy demand there, whether that's by insulating or by improved air tightness. So the retrofit coordinator is absolutely crucial. They are involved in advising the homeowner on the retrofit strategy for your specific home, taking the assessment and coming up with a proposal, working with you to develop a proposal, preparing a design or specification, or working with others to do that, assisting in the installation process, monitoring perhaps, and involved in the handover as well. So many different pieces come together in the jigsaw, but the retrofit coordinator is the center of the wheel, if you like. They're sort of monitoring quality and working with you throughout the process, depending on how much input you feel you need. These are just some quotes picked up from the Retrofit Academy, who provide, or one of the providers of training for the Retrofit Coordinator course. That is covered by the Trust Mark, which I think was mentioned earlier, and they have helped, or helping to grow an industry and increase the level of knowledge and awareness within the existing industry that is needed to tackle a retrofit at a massive scale that obviously needs to happen in the next few years. So yes, very important. Obviously Celsey offer that service, and if you go through Trustmark, there's others who will do the same as well. So yeah, Trustmark are again another name to remember if you don't remember anything else. That's just their website. So I live in Southeast London as well, so I've googled my area today and found there's numerous retrofit coordinators in London. So now moving on to standards, I'm going to be talking about EnerPhit. Obviously, EnerPhit is the passive house refurbishment standard, and it really is the very top of building performance in terms of space heating demand. On the right hand side there, it's above the current standards for new build homes in the UK, and the passive house standard itself is even higher. So going back to what I was said at the beginning, the pounds and pence, the kilowatt hours per square metre per year, the average house in the UK is about 140. If you're in a detached solid wall Victorian property, you can be in excess of 300. So it's a huge step change in performance. So you may have heard that the government is consulting at the moment on the need for social housing to achieve a SAP of C, which the diagram on the left-hand side is the current energy efficiency rating system in the UK, and so it's way beyond that. And if we're really serious about tackling zero carbon, then we really need to be aiming for above. We need to be targeting A at least. So passive house is a methodology, but it's and a standard, if that makes sense. So the EnerPhit is the refurbishment standard, and the passive house is the standard for new build. But it's also a methodology which is built into the design and refurbishment, in this case, process, and it's based on 5 basic principles. Which are on the diagram there, you can see extra thermal insulation, very, very good windows, maybe certified components. You see the stamp on the right hand side there, which is something that if you were looking to build a passive house or EnerPhit scheme, you would be looking for your windows. Similarly, for your ventilation, you would have ventilation with heat recovery. Again, very efficient versions of that. Very good air tightness is required, and thermal bridge-free design, which I'll come on to explain shortly. But that's basically just ensuring that you keep the heat in and you don't lose it through junctions in the building. And when you get to the end of that, there is a certification or a certificate that you can receive. But to actually achieve that, then you need to set that standard at the beginning and work towards it. There's lots of examples, thousands of examples around the world. There's just some of the ones in the UK, and the first passive house building was built nearly 30 years ago now in Germany, which is the image on the left-hand side there, and thousands of completed examples. But crucially, many of them have been monitored to understand performance in use, and what that has shown is that they actually perform very, very well. So also just to note that the works can be phased over time. You may not have the budget to do all of the works all in one go. You can develop a refurbishment plan, which might be something you to implement over the next 15 years, and it might be sold with the property to the next purchaser, who might then take on the next steps in the refurbishment plan to ultimately achieve EnerPhit at the end. So going back to what I was saying a minute ago, in terms of performance, this is just a graph showing the performance of buildings, low energy buildings. This was a study by Leeds Beckett University a few years ago, and each of these is an individual property. The white section of that, each bar, is the predicted energy consumption at the design stage, and the black is the extra over measured in use. So you can see there, the ones that are circled are the passive house buildings. So all low energy buildings, not typical buildings, but the passive house buildings are consistently much closer to the predicted energy consumption. So that's all very well, but what about your priorities in terms of your property? What's important to you? And perhaps all these things are important to you, but in the next stage of evaluating your options, you need to consider what is most important. Maybe maybe you can't do it all in one go, or maybe you need to focus on certain aspects of the property. So evaluating the retrofit options, what matters most? Is it the cost? Is it the disruption? And that's something that shouldn't be underestimated, particularly for certain types of refurbishment. Or is it the reduction of fuel use, the cost, and of course the CO2 emissions? Is it the environmental issues that the key driver for you? And we all have different balance on that equation. But what else is going on in your life right now, and why is that relevant? If you're considering a retrofit, there's lots of what's called trigger points to a potential retrofit. Maybe you need more space, maybe you're considering an extension anyway, maybe you've just moved into the home. So at that point, at that trigger point, you may be willing to consider more in-depth, intrusive works than you might if you were if you weren't at a trigger point, if you like. So we're all in different stages, and you know, it's something that you really need to consider. And maybe you're not ready for a deep retrofit now, but maybe you will be in 2 years' time, and it's planning for that. Really, that's the most important thing. So the looking at disruption from minimal, the image at the top there looks at minimal, low, moderate, high, and significant levels of disruption, and says, for example, changing your light bulbs in your home, very minimal disruption, virtually nil, and you'll reduce your energy consumption, but not by a great deal, but it will make an impact. But there are other things that you might do, maybe at a trigger point, that you wouldn't ordinarily want to do. So ground floor insulation will be hugely disruptive, but it might be worth it. So the other things obviously to bear in mind are the capital cost and the carbon cost effectiveness. What's most cost effective in terms of CO2, tons of CO2 per pound, if you like. So these are some of the measures. The next two slides, this one and the next one, look at some of the key measures. This is taken from the Retrofit Academy, and you can see there the example I just mentioned, the floor insulation, hugely disruptive, because if you can imagine, the ground floor of your property probably is where the kitchen is, probably maybe not the bathroom, but maybe a toilet, and there's fixed appliances that are fixed to that floor, and in insulating that floor you may be wanting to lift that floor, or certainly modify it. Usually there are maybe some exceptions to that, but typically it can be very disruptive. Whereas loft insulation, much less disruptive, relatively inexpensive, and very carbon cost effective. The only problem is most people have already done their loft insulation around the country, because that's the easy stuff. That was the low hanging fruit. But if you've not already done that, then you really should. So you just need to, I suppose, and this is what the retrofit coordinator will be doing with you, going through this. The CELSI advisor would take you through each of these measures and how it would apply to your home. So that what I'm showing you here is obviously a generic assessment based on a typical home. Then moving on to the implementation, what does it actually look like? So we've been involved in many retrofit projects over the years. So I mentioned the one in North London. We also were involved in something called the Retrofit for the Future program about 10 years ago, many properties there, and worked for the Energy Saving Trust. So from that sort of experience, we can see some of the key aspects of how can it affect a typical home. And these are some of the key areas that need to be considered. So when you're considering a retrofit, the insulation, obviously, do we want to insulate externally or internally? Thermal bridges, again, I'll come back to that. Windows, I think we can all imagine what a window replacement might be, but it's important that we don't just replace them in the same way we might have done 10 years ago. Air tightness and ventilation, very important. And then, of course, lighting and low carbon heating. External wall insulation. So this is the one where I think we can all imagine a tea cozy, but yeah, it doesn't have to look like that. This is quite a simple one. There are much more complex ones where we're looking to replicate brick details. This is quite a simple one, but even here, it's really important that the details are considered. So you can see that all the pipe work there, for instance, has been brought forward. We came across examples where contractors had not done that and buried pipe work in insulation, and they had to be told to start again effectively. But unfortunately, going back to what I was saying earlier, that the quality is crucial, and unfortunately the Green Deal back in 2014, many of the properties that were insulated were done badly because there wasn't the quality control on site, and nobody was really supporting the homeowner in that process. And this was a good example. Internal wall insulation, yes, obviously for properties in conservation areas, listed properties, external wall insulation will not be possible usually. And usually, maybe not for grade 1 listed, but for most properties, it might be possible to do internal wall insulation, but that is more complicated. And obviously, living in that is really perhaps not so practical. It can be done in phases, and it's not impossible, but it's very, very difficult, and you really need to go into it with your eyes open. Whereas external wall insulation, it really is, most of it's happening on the outside of the property, and the impact on you is much less living through the process. Replacement windows, yes, we can all imagine what that looks like, but many of the windows that have been installed over the last 30 years, the double glazing that has been installed over the last 30 years is very inefficient. The U values, the thermal transmittance, the property of that window is not particularly great in the first place, but the frame is also perhaps a conductor of heat and can often be worse than the glass. So you can often might find mold around the edge of the window frame that seals because the aluminium spacer in the glass is conducting heat. And so you really need to ensure that you're getting a really good quality window, ideally triple glazed or really good double glazed window with thermally broken. But crucially, the image on the bottom there shows that it's really, really important for them to be fitted properly, and many or a significant proportion of the heat loss comes from the gaps around the window. And you might put your hand to the edge of a window, a double glazed window, and installed at some point in the last 20 years, and you might find that it's actually colder at the perimeter than you'd expect. So it's really important that they're well fitted and sealed to the wall. Thermal bridging, here we go to the thermal bridging. That's the one that often people don't quite understand, but obviously you can see the thermographic image at the bottom there, and the image at the top is a window. It's much in my house. I live in a local authority, very inefficient home, and I'd love to insulate it, but I can't, in Southwark. And I have concrete lintels, 1970s concrete boot lintel, which is radiating heat through that concrete. So even though the council has pumped cavity wall insulation into the cavity behind the brick, the heat is effectively bypassing the cavity wall insulation and going straight through that concrete above the window head and radiating to fresh air. So heat doesn't flow in straight lines. It is attracted to those cold spots and particularly wets as well. So the image at the bottom is a property in South London that shall remain nameless, but we've discovered there that the cavity wall insulation had been installed very, very badly, and it had become saturated. So the red areas there are saturated cavity wall insulation, which is actually a much worse than if it had done nothing at all in transmitting the heat through the wall. So it's really important that you understand some of the issues with your property, and there may be defects, latent defects like that, which are not immediately obvious, but by doing the thermographic study, you'll see the condition of your property and whether actually that needs to be tackled first before the retrofit is done. Condensation risk analysis, yes, they're very, very important, particularly where internal wall insulation is proposed. Air tightness and ventilation, it's kind of two sides of the same coin, that most buildings, most traditional buildings are leaky. Ironically, often post-war buildings are worse than pre-war buildings because of the wet plaster that's applied to maybe a Victorian property is often much better than the plasterboard that we filled our houses with in the 1960s and 70s. So, but either way, it's usually worse than it should be, and it can be significantly improved. And we by doing that and understanding where the gaps and cracks are and sealing those up, we can tackle the heat loss. So setting a strategy really for your air tightness. So the image on the left-hand side there is a property we did about 10 years ago, little two-story house in Westminster, where the air tightness layer is the blue line, and then there was various points along there where key junctions that had to be properly detailed. That was our airtight membrane, if you like, and by having an airtight membrane, we could ensure that we weren't losing heat unnecessarily, but we were ventilating properly as well. So as I say, the two sides of the same coin. The image on the right hand side is another property in London where we are showing the route of the ventilation ductwork, and that's what the image on the bottom right is showing, what might be hidden in the ceiling void. Now, obviously, that's very intrusive, and maybe something that you would only do at a trigger point. You wouldn't necessarily want to do that in every case, but it's something to certainly consider. And if you're significantly improving your air tightness, then you would want to have a proper ventilation system. The image on the bottom right, the little image there, just shows if you're perhaps in a one-bedroom small property, just a handful of rooms, then you may be able to get away with a single ventilator through a wall rather than a combined system. But you really need to take your advice from your retrofit coordinator and designer on that. won't spend long on this one. I think we all know we need to be putting energy efficient lights in, and it's a bit of a no-brainer, but yeah, it'd be crazy to spend all the money on the more complicated things without doing this as well. And of course, the A++ rated appliances are crucial as well. So whatever with the fridge, freezer, and everything else as well. The heating and hot water systems, the heating demand will significantly reduce. Obviously, we're looking to reduce our heating demand from, say, an average of 140 down to at least 50 or below if we can. EnerPhit is 25, so I think anything below 14 you've done well. So getting your heat demand down to that sort of figure, your hot water demand will suddenly become a much more important proportion of the demand that you need compared to a typical home, uninsulated home, I should say. So there's different ways of doing that. There's ground source heat pumps, air source heat pumps, and again, you need to look at that in detail with the designer. They can be combined with the heat recovery unit, but if you think of it as a replacement for your gas boiler, there's it's in some cases a bit smaller, some cases a bit bigger, depending on what you're asking it to do. But and the location of that is crucial as well in the home. But I really haven't got, I don't think I can dive into the specifics of that tonight, because it really is something that you would look at for your specific home. Then this next few slides is really just looking at an alternative approach, because what we've been looking at so far is taking a scientific approach, and obviously you'd need to do that. You understand the building performance and setting a target, but this is a solution which the Dutch have pioneered over the last 10 years, and it started to develop in the UK. There's 2 schemes now that have been delivered to the Energiesprong model, which Energiesprong just means is Dutch for energy spring. So to try to dramatically increase the amount of retrofit. And they look at it from the other end of the telescope, if you like, and they say, well, we, the solution provider, if that's what the term they use, will provide the homeowner with a retrofit for their home, and we will recover the cost of that over the next 30 years, and we will guarantee that homeowner a comfort plan with a certain amount of hot water and heat. So the retrofit, the upfront cost of the retrofit is recovered by the organisation that paid for the work, or the bulk of the work in the first place. So you as the homeowner continue paying the same fuel bills. You don't get the ongoing saving, but you haven't paid the capital cost in the first place. So this is something that the UK government's looking at the moment. The GLA is incentivising, and a lot of social housing landlords are looking at that at the moment to try and stimulate the market in the UK. And it's still early days, but it's an interesting idea, and perhaps something that might take off and make the whole retrofit process affordable for everyone. And that's just a scheme in Holland there. Though there are schemes now. There's one in Nottingham and one in Essex, which have been completed. So finally, is it all worth it after all that? I would argue yes, but it really is important to consider where you are on the journey and the trigger point that you're at, and whether you're willing to finance or live with the extent of refurbishment that will be needed ultimately for your property. So you can be looking at significant energy reductions, heating bill reductions, and also huge improvements to your thermal comfort. So maybe, as we found often with social housing projects, maybe residents are spending £1,500, but actually, if they could, they would spend a lot more to try and get their property up to a reasonable temperature, but they simply can't afford to do that. So actually, once you've retrofitted the property and the fuel bills are massively reduced, the energy consumption is massively reduced, the residents enjoy the benefit, if you like. So the expected financial savings might not be the same, if that makes sense, because they can now heat their home to an adequate level, whereas previously they couldn't do that. Better air quality, very important to say that proper retrofit, properly considered, will and can improve the air quality in the home. Mechanical ventilation with heat recovery, filters, particularly if you're in urban areas with higher levels of air pollution, can be a big contributor to improving that. Thermal comfort, I think I've mentioned several times now, but obviously you can now use all the homes in your property, and this is obviously more important than ever as we're all spending a lot more time in our homes. All our homes can be comfortable, and we found from many projects we've been involved in, the unexpected benefits of children being able to do their homework in their bedrooms because they can sit there and it's not so cold that it's impossible to sit there. They don't end up doing their homework in the living room. So it's lots of unexpected benefits like that as well. Maintenance, yes, insulating the building properly, understanding how the building works will keep the structure nice and warm and dry, so it will potentially and actually increase the lifespan of the building. So no damage to the building fabric. And obviously no damage to us, to residents who live in these properties. There have been lots of studies showing the positive impacts on health outcomes for refurbishment works. And that's really just on the limited refurbishment works that have been carried out over the last 10 years or so. We're obviously standing now at the bottom of a massive cliff of much greater and much better refurbishment over the next 20 to 30 years. So it will, go back a little bit there just to say, in terms of future energy price rises as well, by doing the fabric first measures and reducing our energy demand, we are also future-proofing ourselves against the cost of energy price rises. So it really is worth considering. Normally when we're looking at payback, we just consider the current price of electricity, but that obviously could significantly increase. So increased value, there's been various studies, but quite limited data, because limited data pools available so far. This is a project that we refurbished in the North London scheme I mentioned earlier a few years ago. And yeah, you can see a significant improvement. What that's done to the values, we don't know, but I wouldn't be surprised if it's improved. And finally, just to say, obviously, can we really afford not to do this? I think there's a lot of, well, more than a lot, overwhelming evidence that we clearly have to take action now, and building retrofit is obviously a key part of that jigsaw. And that's it from me. So I will try and stop my slide share.
Thank you very much, James. What a great presentation. I really appreciate that. So we've had quite a few questions come up in the chat, many of which have been answered by the experts sitting in our audience as well. So thank you for your input, everyone. But one of the first questions is, what was the unit of measure for the 40 number that you suggested?
The 40?
Yes. Would it have been U values?
I can't remember what slide I was talking about at that point.
If the person who asked the question would be able to switch on their video and explain what the topic was, that would be great.
Hi there. It was talking about energy efficiency, and it was going from 140 down to 40 or sometimes 20, but it wasn't clear what the unit was. Yes,
sorry. It's the space heating demand. So it's measured in kilowatt hours per square meter per year. So depending on how big your property is, that obviously it will be a bigger number, but actually it won't, because it's per square meter. It applies to everyone. So whether you're in a 50 square meter one bedroom flat or a 200 square meter detached property, you can compare like with like, because it's on a square meter basis. So the average in the UK space heating demand is about 140. So that's an average of all the detached properties and all the flatted properties, and properties of all ages. But there was a slide that I showed at the beginning showing that if you're in a detached or perhaps an end terrace or a semi-detached property, pre-war or post-war, uninsulated, it could be a lot higher than that. And almost every property, excluding say listed properties and certain ones in conservation areas, should be able to get down to sort of figures around 40. I mean, EnerPhit is 25, so that's really the gold standard of energy efficiency refurbishment. You can go a bit better, but it's sort of diminishing returns a little bit when you go to that sort of level. But Energiesprong, for instance, the Dutch standard, they target between 30 and 40. And to give you an idea, a brand new house built to current building regulations in the UK would be about 54. So it's better than a brand new house.
Great, thank you, James. It's a bit of a reflection on where our standards lie at the minute for new builds. Another question, should you be removing air bricks to make your property airtight?
No. Well, let me clarify that. If you're talking about air bricks underneath a suspended floor, for instance, then that floor is designed, that void below your floor is designed to be ventilated. If you're talking about air bricks that might be in the wall, then this is why it's part of the same equation. You need to understand the implications of sealing that up. Yes, you do need to seal it up, but you need to ensure that you've got adequate ventilation. And that's where the retrofit coordinator would come in, because they would be able to give you the technical advice on what level of ventilation is required for your property. And it's all set out in building regulations based on the size of the property. And you would also, just as you did with a thermographic test at the beginning of the property, you would do an air tightness test as well. So an air tightness test might show that your property is maybe 10 air changes per hour currently, and you would want to get down to around about 3 at least, if not lower. EnerPhit, it needs to be at 1 air change per hour. In layman's terms, it's a bit more complicated than that, but essentially air changes per hour. Imagine all the air in your property changes once an hour. Whereas in a leaky property, it might be 10 or 15 times. So you're heating the air in your property 10 or 15 times every hour, and it's all disappearing out the window or through the gaps and cracks in your property. So you need a certain amount of air change, but nowhere near as much as that. And that's where it's uncontrolled ventilation like that, then that's where you get high energy consumption. But the key thing, I'm sure other speakers will talk about this in future weeks, that the key thing you need to ensure is that you've got the optimum balance, really.
Okay, that's interesting. And someone else has asked, to what degree do you think that retrofitting costs get reflected in a house's value? You did talk about it a little bit in your presentation.
Well, it's an emerging area, really, because there's not been enough proper retrofit really across the country to say reliably. There's some evidence. I think the University of Cambridge Land Institute did a study a few years ago showing the uplift for band A and B properties. So there is some evidence, and Savills, I just noticed the other day, have also released something on a similar study showing the uplift in values for band A properties, but it's still early days. But I think it's a bit of carrot and stick. I think there's a lot of awareness that you can no longer rent banned F&G properties. So there's an understanding that actually if people don't do something, they could end up with stranded assets if they're renting the properties. So that's also a trigger to the market. So there's lots of things changing at the moment. So I think over the next few years, there's going to be a lot more data on that.
That's interesting.
Hi, it's
Go ahead.
Yesterday I did see something that basically analysed all the different measures and technologies in the Green Homes Grant, and roughly the percentage increase is on house values, and it was kind of between 2 to 6% ish. However, there's also the thermal gains in comfort to be looked at too, as James has just pointed out. He's never not lived in an unleaky, drafty house. So yeah, let's get you insulated, James. And I can't remember where I saw that blinking stuff, because some stuff goes past. But Nadia, if people are being, emailed slides or whatever, I can, at some point, I'll remember where I saw it and I can send everybody a link.
That would be wonderful. That would be great. Thank you so much, Alex. So we'll go for one more question, and then I think we'll have to round up because we are almost out of time. But James, do you have any idea of the average cost for retrofitting and fitting an air source heat pump for a 3-bed semi 1930s house?
I knew somebody was going to ask this.
quick maths. It's a very tough question.
It's quite difficult to generalize, to be honest, but the government is assuming at the moment that to do deep retrofit properly, you're going to be looking at figures of around about £25,000 per property. At the moment, the costs or the funding available is way short of that, and actually the ambition is, the long-term ambition 2050 is that we need to do deep retrofit, but the funding, the Green Homes Grant, is obviously much less than that, but it's still a helpful contribution. So I suppose if I were in a position where I was at that trigger point and I was able to take some of the measures, and I was in a semi-detached property or terrace property with I think often the coldest part of the house, if you're in a particularly in a terrace property, say, is the bit that sticks out the back, where the bathroom is and the small bedroom and maybe the kitchen, and often that's the bit that you can't see from the road, and actually has much higher heat loss than the front of the property, much more exposed wall area. So that is a good place to start, and ideally you would do everything in one go, but the retrofit coordinator would sort of show you the pros and cons and the risks associated with doing limited measures, and there's some measures that are complementary and some that are not, and that's why the retrofit coordinator is so important, and that's why it went wrong so badly 5 or 6 years ago, because there was no retrofit coordinator. But so if I can big up retrofit coordinators, then yeah, they're a crucial part of the jigsaw in giving you that advice.
Amazing, that's great. And I think Alex did mention in the chat that she thought the starter costs of an air source heat pump were between kind of £9,000 and £13,000, but that is dependent on your location. Costs are obviously higher in London than they are elsewhere in the country. To give you an idea about solar PV, I had a quote today for around 2 kilowatts of solar panels on my 3-bed house with a battery, a 3 kilowatt battery, that came out at £3,800. So technology costs for the more mature technologies in terms of renewable energy, I'd say have come down quite quickly, but air source heat pumps is probably one of the things that's still a little bit more expensive.
Yeah.
I'd just like to add a note that anybody that goes off and follows the government website information on there's a calculator on simple energy advice, which is a kind of trying to act like a sort of very light retrofit coordinator by asking you some very simple questions, and it spits out what's effectively a plan, but it's like 3 sides of information and not very useful. It will tell you things like, so for that 3-bed semi, I did a couple of tests and it came out at saying an air source heat pump would be 8.5 grand, which is, you know, I'd like to know an installer that could and would do it for that. And also to watch out as well, because not going with trusted installers, yes, the PAS and the Trustmark will weed them out, but there are some unscrupulous people whose works and tech has suddenly got a little bit more expensive with the Green Homes grant. So trying to navigate through that maze is sort of quite important as you sort of set sail as a retrofit person doing their own home.
Yeah, thank you, Alex, for that note. And that brings me nicely on to kind of summarize our first webinar of the series. So if you're interested in finding out about the Futurefit Homes program more, if you're interested in retrofitting your own home and you are in Lewisham, Greenwich, or one of the Southeast London boroughs, do get in touch with us. My email is nadia@celsey.org.uk. A huge thank you to James for coming and speaking and providing such great insight into the world of energy efficiency. And as a last note, I did mention earlier in my presentation that one of the things you could do after this webinar is switch your energy supplier, which is a great way to go green very quickly and very easily. And I now have the details of the partnership with Co-op Energy that we have. And that is the Co-op Community Power Tariff. So I have posted the link in the chat, and I'm just going to share my screen with you so you can see what that web page looks like. So our partnership with Co-op Energy is essentially allowing you to switch to an energy supply tariff where you're powered by community groups like us from across the UK. What they have done, Co-op Energy has partnered with an organisation called Octopus Energy, one of the very new, very agile suppliers that have come into the market, and they are working with them to donate £20 to our fuel poverty alleviation fund for every person that switches to this tariff. And they're also going to put an extra £10 into a pot for community groups across the UK that they can apply to have a grant from for various different community projects. So if you go to our website and you come to this page, there's a little bit of information about the tariff and what it looks like. And if you click this link, it will take you through to Octopus Energy's webpage for the Co-op Energy tariff. And then you can enter your postcode and get a quote. And it is the Co-op Community Power Tariff that is donating to our Fuel Poverty Alleviation Fund. So if you're interested, do that. I would also recommend looking at a switching site and comparing what deals you can get from different energy suppliers if price is the most important thing to you, because there are lots of deals out there and you're probably not on the best one. And again, just a huge thank you to everyone for joining us. We've had sort of over 80 people join us tonight for this webinar, which is amazing. If you found it useful and if you found that we've given out some good information, please do sign up to the next event, which is on Wednesday next week. That will be Wednesday the 21st of October. And you can also donate through the Eventbrite link. Minimum donation is £1, or you can get a free ticket and share it with all your friends and colleagues who might be interested in this area. So I'll leave it at that for now. Thank you again to James, and thank you to Alex for her help with this as well. And I'll hopefully see you guys next Wednesday for our session at 6:30 p.m. If you have any more questions, do get in touch with us. It's nadia@celsey.org.uk. And I will see you next week. Thank you for joining.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Good night.